Picture this, a Boeing boardroom in Seattle, 2004. Executives are staring at the spreadsheets showing the 757 production line. One of them says the words that would haunt Boeing for the next 20 years. Kill it. We don't need a replacement. And just like that, Boeing murdered the most versatile aircraft in the aviation industry. No successor planned, no backup strategy, just gone. Here's what makes this absolutely insane. Fast forward to January 2026. Airbus is printing money with the A321 XLR. Over 500 orders worth $65 billion. Airlines are literally begging for more. Routes that were impossible for decades are suddenly profitable. And Boeing, they have nothing. Zero. Not a single aircraft that can compete in this segment. But here's the part that'll make your jaw drop. Boeing didn't just lose this market, they invented it. They dominated it for 25 years with the legendary 757. Then they handed Airbus a complete monopoly on a silver platter because the finance guys in suits cared more about quarterly earnings than building great aircraft. This is the biggest strategic disaster in modern aviation history, and I'm about to show you exactly how it happened, step by step. Quick question, have you seen more A321 XLRs at airports lately? Drop yes in the comments, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the entire aviation industry forever. Subscribe to Skyline Secrets right now. We're exposing the corporate greed and the financial engineering that destroyed Boeing's dominance in the industry. Hit that subscribe button. This story gets absolutely wild. Let me show you what Boeing threw away. The Boeing 757 wasn't just another aircraft. It was a miracle of engineering that entered service in 1983. It could take off from the short runways at high-altitude airports like Denver. It could fly coast to coast across the United States with 200 passengers and still have fuel reserves. It had the range for transatlantic flights to Europe, and it could land at the airports with the strictest noise restrictions. Airlines were absolutely obsessed with it. United operated over 90 of them. Delta built entire route networks around the 757's unique capabilities. American Airlines depended on it for their most profitable routes across the Atlantic and throughout the Americas. The 757 was the only aircraft that could profitably fly routes like New York to Shannon, Ireland, Boston to Reykjavik, Miami to cities across South America. These routes were too long for a standard 737 to handle efficiently, but they were too thin for an expensive widebody like the 767 or 777. Think about it. Have you ever flown on a 757? Do you remember how powerful the takeoff felt? Drop your experience in the comments. By the 1990s, Boeing was printing money from the 757 program. Orders kept flowing in from airlines around the world. Airlines couldn't get enough of this aircraft. Then in 1997, everything changed. Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, and the McDonnell Douglas executives brought a poison into Boeing's culture. Finance first thinking. Engineering excellence? Forget it. The stock price became everything. Quarterly earnings mattered more than the long-term strategy. The bean counters took over the company. They looked at the 757 production line and saw a problem. The profit margins aren't high enough. They complained. Why keep building this aircraft when we can push the airlines toward the 737 or the 767? In 2004, Boeing announced the death sentence. The 757 production would end in 2005. Airlines were absolutely shocked. What will replace these aircraft? They asked desperately. Boeing's answer? The 737-900ER will handle the shorter routes. The 767 will cover the longer ones. You'll be fine. Except the airlines would never be fine, and Boeing was about to learn the most expensive lesson in corporate history. Here's what Boeing's finance geniuses completely missed. The 737-900ER couldn't do what the 757 did. It didn't have the range for the transatlantic flights. It couldn't operate efficiently from the hot and high airports. It couldn't handle the steep approaches at challenging airports like London City. The 767, way too big and too expensive for most routes. Airlines didn't need 280 seats on a route from Newark to Dublin during the off-season. They needed 200 seats maximum. The 767 was burning money with too many empty seats, so the airlines were trapped. They kept flying their ancient 757s for 25, 30, even 35 years past their intended service life. Delta operated 757s that were older than the pilots flying them. United kept nursing these aircraft along. American had no choice but to keep them in service. The maintenance costs exploded. Parts became impossible to find as suppliers stopped making them, but the airlines had absolutely no choice. There was no replacement aircraft available. level. From 2005 to 2018, airlines begged Boeing repeatedly, "Build us a 757 replacement. We'll buy hundreds of them. Just give us what we need." Boeing's response every single time: "Wait for the 797. We're studying a new middle market airplane." Year after year, Boeing studied. They drew concept designs. They ran the numbers through financial models. They held countless meetings, but they never committed to actually building anything. The finance team kept asking the same question: what's the return on investment? How does this affect the stock price this quarter? Here's a question for you. Do you think a company should prioritize short-term profits or long-term innovation? Let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic Ocean, Airbus was quietly building the aircraft that would destroy Boeing's position in this market segment. Airbus understood what Boeing refused to accept. The middle market wasn't dying. It was actually exploding with potential. The A321 had been in production since 1994 as Airbus's answer to the larger 737 variants. But Airbus saw an opportunity that Boeing completely missed. What if they could extend the range significantly? In 2015, Airbus launched the A321LR, the long-range variant with more fuel capacity and a range of about 4,000 nautical miles. Airlines that had been nursing their old 757s for years finally had an alternative. Orders started flowing in immediately. After the McDonnell-Douglas merger in 1997, Boeing's corporate culture changed dramatically. The company moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago in 2001, away from the engineers, away from the factories, closer to Wall Street's way of thinking. The message was crystal clear. Boeing was now run by finance executives, not by aviation passion and engineering excellence. The pressure from Wall Street was relentless. Maximize shareholder value every quarter, cut costs aggressively, boost quarterly earnings at all costs. Every decision had to justify itself financially in the short term. When the engineers proposed developing a 757 replacement in the mid-2000s, the finance team killed it immediately. The development costs are too high, they argued. We'd need to invest $15 to $20 billion. That'll hurt our earnings for years. The shareholders won't accept it. Instead, Boeing chose the cheaper option. Keep stretching the 737 airframe. First the 737-900ER, then the 737 MAX 9, then the MAX 10. Each variant was just a band-aid solution, trying to cover a wound that needed major surgery. The problem, you can only stretch an airframe that was designed in the 1960s so far before you hit fundamental limitations. The 737 was never meant to replace the 757's capabilities, but admitting that would mean admitting they needed to invest billions in a clean sheet design, and the finance team absolutely refused to do that. Meanwhile, Airbus made the opposite choice. They invested billions in developing the A321XLR. Yes, it hurt their short-term earnings, but they understood something Boeing had forgotten. In the aviation industry, you have to invest in the future, not just squeeze profits from the past. By 2018, Boeing finally woke up. They started seriously studying the 797, or the new middle market airplane. It would seat 220 to 270 passengers with the range to compete against the A321XLR. Then disaster struck. The 737 MAX crashes happened in 2019. Two tragic crashes, global grounding of the fleet, billions in losses. The entire company went into crisis mode. The 797 program was quietly killed. All resources went toward fixing the MAX crisis and dealing with the financial fallout. By the time Boeing stabilized in 2022, Airbus had already won the war. The A321XLR was in final testing. The orders were locked in for decades. Boeing had lost a 20-year head start because some executives in Chicago wanted better quarterly numbers to report to Wall Street. What do you think? Should Boeing's executives be held accountable for this disaster? Share your thoughts. January 2026. Here's the brutal scoreboard. Airbus A321 XLR in full commercial service with multiple airlines. Over 500 orders confirmed. Airlines are making serious money on routes that were impossible just 5 years ago. JetBlue flies Boston to Paris profitably on a single-aisle jet. United connects smaller cities directly to Europe without hub connections. The middle market that Boeing abandoned is now worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Boeing's response in 2026, still absolutely nothing. The 737 MAX 10, if it ever gets certified by the FAA, still can't match the A321 XLR's range or efficiency. The proposed 797 is dead and buried. There's no middle market aircraft in development, no timeline for one, no plan whatsoever. Boeing executives keep repeating the same line. We're studying the market and assessing our options. Translation: we have no idea what to do, and we're terrified to commit the investment. Airlines that desperately want to buy American-made aircraft are being forced to buy from Airbus instead. United, American, Delta, they all wanted a Boeing solution. They begged for it, but Boeing abandoned them completely. Each A321 XLR sells for approximately $130 to $140 million. With over 500 orders, that's at least $65 billion in revenue that went to Airbus instead of Boeing. But the real cost is much higher. These airlines are now locked into the Airbus ecosystem for the next 20 to 25 years. They'll buy spare parts from Airbus, training from Airbus, support services from Airbus. Boeing didn't just lose a product category, they lost an entire generation of airline customers and their loyalty. Would you trust Boeing with your next aircraft order if you were an airline CEO? Drop yes or no below. Charity. You might be wondering, why doesn't Boeing just build a competitor right now? Great question. Here's why it's basically impossible at this point. First, the time factor. Developing a clean sheet aircraft from scratch takes 8 to 10 years minimum, from the initial design to certification to entry into service. If Boeing started development today in 2026, they'd be lucky to have an aircraft ready by 2035 or 2036. By that time, Airbus will have delivered well over 1,000 A321 XLRs to airlines around the world. The market will be completely saturated with Airbus aircraft. Second, the investment required. A clean sheet middle market aircraft would cost at least $20 to $25 billion to develop properly. Boeing's financial position after the 737 MAX crisis, the COVID pandemic, and the ongoing production issues is extremely shaky. Where would they get that kind of massive investment? Third, the market risk. Would airlines even buy a Boeing competitor at this point? They've already invested billions in the A321 XLR. They've already trained thousands of pilots. They've already built entire route networks around this aircraft's capabilities. Switching to a Boeing alternative would require massive additional investment with no clear benefit. Fourth, the technical challenge. The A321 XLR sets an incredibly high performance bar. Boeing would need to match or exceed its range, efficiency, and economics. That's not easy to do. Airbus spent years perfecting the extra fuel tank design and optimizing every system. Boeing even floated the idea of a 737 MAX variant with even more range, but their own engineers shot it down immediately. The airframe is completely maxed out. You can't stretch it any further without seriously compromising safety or performance. So Boeing is completely stuck. They can't quickly develop a real competitor. They can't modify their existing aircraft to match the A321 XLR's performance. And every single day that passes, Airbus gets stronger and more dominant in this crucial market segment. So here we are in 2026. Boeing invented the middle market segment with the iconic 757. They dominated it completely for 25 years. Then they killed it and handed Airbus a monopoly worth hundreds of billions of dollars on a silver platter. The A321 XLR is now reshaping global aviation. New routes connecting cities that were never connected before. New business models for airlines. New opportunities for travelers. And Boeing is completely shut out of the opportunity they themselves created decades ago. This is exactly what happens when financial engineering replaces actual engineering, when quarterly thinking destroys strategic vision, when stock buybacks and dividends matter more than building great aircraft. Final question for you: if you were running Boeing today, what would you do? Try to build a competitor even though you're already a decade behind, or accept the loss and focus on other market segments? What's the right strategic move? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious what you think, and if this investigation opened your eyes to how corporate greed and short-term thinking shape the aviation industry, you need to subscribe to Skyline Secrets immediately. We're exposing the strategic disasters, the financial engineering schemes, and the billion-dollar mistakes that the mainstream media never properly analyzes or covers. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the notification bell so you never miss an investigation. Next week, we're diving into an even bigger question. Why did Airbus almost kill the A380 before it even flew? The behind-the-scenes crisis that nearly bankrupted the entire company will absolutely shock you. See you in the next deep dive investigation.